That's good.
kind of a time to
Oh,
glean
wonderful.
some ideas and then also take notes, is what Cheryl was saying, so that if you have any questions or insight or additional thoughts that we can catch up later, because I know that we probably all have a lot of thoughts that we want to share or questions or whatever, but I wasn't particularly thinking that this was the time for that, because that is something I really want. But I was just trying to keep it short and sweet. And then I did mention in the text to some of you, I would like to meet with everybody individually before we all get things kicked off. But today's just kind of an overview of basically some things that Emmanuel and I talked about a week ago, in some slight changes that we might make, and then for some of you new, additions to life and education and whatnot, because it's new for the Fries and the Lowe's. So I think everybody, just to give a brief overview, knows for the most part, those who were not involved yet, what we have been doing was separated into 2 different days, which was a Monday and a Saturday. And then as recent since the summer kicked off, we've condensed our time together on just 1 day a week, which is Saturdays. And when it was 2 days, the Saturday was simply a Bible study and a personal kind of one-on-one time on Saturdays.
History time.
Right, I'm sorry, I'm going backwards a little bit. So Saturdays was just Bible study, and then Mondays was a combination of like writing and history and those sorts of things were on Mondays particularly. And so when we combined it, we've combined Saturday was a Bible study and a history time. So just to give you guys a brief summary of what we have been doing, and then some things that we've kind of talked about now that the season is coming back to a little bit more freedom and time. And Miss Elaine has been doing before summer was doing graphic design, and you can correct me if there was additional, I think there was a interior design with some of the gals on Mondays as well. So and I'm just talking about practicals here, so forgive me, I probably could have covered a couple other things, but I wanted to just get some practical ideas out of the way, so that you guys can kind of start thinking about what that may look like. One thing that Emmanuel and I kind of talked about, and I'm super excited about as we are introducing some, once young and not so young anymore kiddos that are of age and getting to, Lord willing, participate, kind of what does that look like? Because that shifts not only, different ages, but now we've got more bodies in a space, and so kind of trying to seek out and imagine what that what that may look like, and how everyone else plays a part in that, and how everybody else sees that coming about. So that's where I was asking Emmanuel specifically, like what are some thoughts and what that might look like now that we're going to be adding some more sweet bodies in there. So one thing that we kind of considered, since it has in the past with more time had 2 separate days of the week, basically Monday would come back into play, because that's what we'd already decided, is that once the season opened up, we would bring Monday time back, and that time would kind of keep the history, which is what Justin has so amazingly been working with the kids for almost a year now, I think. And then the additional to that on Mondays, we had kind of thrown around what it might look like to add some other educational endeavors on that day. So these are all just ideas. None of these are set in stone, but obviously, and I had talked to Noah, I don't think he's in here, but I had mentioned it to Noah, and he's still kind of thinking about, say if some kiddos needed some additional math tutoring, that might be an opportunity for Noah to step in and help with math tutoring. We talked about, Lady and I, and even Kim have talked some about science, and how to potentially get some, science, even for some of like my older kids, and I think obviously everyone can enjoy science together. So those are just some ideas, and correct me if I'm wrong, if there was anything else that we would do specifically on Mondays. I think those were.
I think that pretty leave it open for the parents to discuss with each other.
Yes, for sure, yeah, and that's why I say this is kind of just an overview of thoughts and ideas. And so then on Saturdays, we would and I think this is a little bit more where I think if you have some specifics to share, but on Saturdays would be more of a time for the continued Bible study with Emmanuel, as well as a writing course, poetry writing
Yes.
on Saturdays. And so that's kind of where it would be an opportunity for, I guess individual families and individual kids that are a part of the course would be deciding, what parts do we have for, what works for us and our family and season of life. And so, sorry, I probably should have started this, but maybe everybody already knows this. As far as the educational age bracket, it really starts at about 13. And correct me if I'm wrong on that,
That's
but
good,
yeah, okay. So I didn't know if that was, I think that was clear to most everybody, but I just wanted to mention that in case that,
Yeah.
because I didn't start out saying that. So,
I think Hannah is good at age mark for participation.
She'll be 13 on the 26th.
Oh,
Almost
there you
there.
go.
Almost.
There you go. So.
yeah.
Very close.
So, I mean, that can, vary in certain months and whatnot as far as between 12 and 13, but I think that was just kind of something I wanted to make sure I covered. But, yeah, so, I mean, that's pretty simple as far as what I had kind of hoped to share. And I know I kind of wanted Tim to briefly just share in regard to, I heard you talking about it the other day, but kind of the difference in what, we presume education to be, which I think everyone in this room understands in some levels, but I just wanted to
Yeah.
reiterate that.
Hey, brother, come around here.
He's been washing dishes. Do you want to sit here, actually?
I don't care.
Because the recording
Doesn't
thing.
matter. Oh. So I think it's important for us to, especially when we're able to get the parents together, to kind of recast the vision for what we're doing and why we're doing it. And this has always been a topic that has caused confusion. It doesn't mean that anyone in particular is confused or misguided or anything. I think for the most part, the Western educational.
Let's wait for Kim to come back.
She's recording.
She can hear.
Recording,
She
okay.
can hear, yeah, go ahead.
I think for the most part, the Western educational system has ingrained a certain mindset about education, what it means to be successful in education, and what potentials and possibilities are afforded a young person because of their education and whatever else, education being the key word. And we obviously don't invalidate some of the principles there by any stretch of the imagination. What the school system has done in the Western world in particular, through forced education basically, and also through some very subtle but not benign influences in the educational system, has really transformed modern day education and even its goals to be something quite different than the basic principles of education. So back when there were very few schools and in more rural areas where a vast majority of people in the world grow up still, we can see our folks in Africa. We can still make observations of a country like the Asian countries that have just unimaginable populations. And their education system is actually changing pretty dramatically now in the recent decades. But for instance, when Emmanuel grew up in rural China, if a young child did not dedicate themselves and actually have a pretty substantial desire and commitment to be educated, fine. You don't educate, then you don't get educated.
90%.
That's your own choice. And so that I share that to make a very obvious, drastic difference between Western education, where an officer will show up at your door potentially and say your child's not going to school, and they have to be because that's mandated. That's a different approach. So now in Western societies, education has become a very entitled process. And so we've laid the foundation for entitlement, and then we've encouraged entitlement. And even in the family unit, let's separate ourselves from the institutional education system for a moment and even touched back into a pretty large group of folks across the U.S. in particular that have opted to homeschool their children through smaller gatherings, co-ops, or even in the individual home. Most are still propagating the idea of a very individualistic life. You can do what you want. You can learn what you want. You can become what you want. You can have whatever type of job you want, and you can pursue whatever you want to in education. And so again, the mentality of entitlement has not escaped the young people. What has also been further stripped away, and this has been something that's been a concern even in the Christian community for many decades in relation to homeschool, is that you're taking away a social education from your children, which does have some validity. And there were some parents that were so over their children that they were literally green at the gills. They didn't know how to talk to people. They didn't know how to interact in social situations. They didn't know how to handle problems, because the only problems they ever had to handle were in the household. And for the most part, their parents handled those for them. And so those are very subtle but very destructive aspects of various educational approaches. So, as we've learned more about what the people of God are and who the people of God are to be, obviously education's a part of that process. But at this point, I want to make a very clear demarcation between what we typically think of as education, academics, academic training for college prep, and therefore for the workplace environment, whether that's going to be a skilled trade or a working trade or an educational trade, medical, whatever. Our fundamental focus is not on academics. So that doesn't mean that academics aren't important, but
In the STEAM efforts, maybe clarify that the neediness on academics.
well, I think that what we would like to see develop over time, over maybe the next 2 to 5 years, is some additional academic. That's why we're discussing what we are in relation to what are some other needs and what can we provide as it relates to those needs in this community. We're not initially imagining that we're going to be an institutional type academic school. And that's okay, because that's not our highest priority. But we don't want to neglect those either. We want to make sure that our children have the basics and beyond of academic education. So, but let's just clearly define some things from others. When we say we can leave education where it is, it's a very convoluted word. It's a word that means something very specific in the Western mind, and it's academic, and it has to do with academic success and whatever else. What we wanted to do is begin to rebuild the foundations of a culture. And so what we're doing at the studio, whatever and wherever that is, we don't know our full longevity at this location. Maybe the Lord will provide something else. But we intend to maintain a gathering area specifically for the young people for educational purposes. But to redefine that, what that place is a culture building center. One of the reasons that we started with like history and poetry and writing is because they were subjects that allowed us to basically observe culture through history and see the products or the fruits of certain cultures and societies, no matter what their bent was. There were cultures that were leaning very heavily on academics for their young people, training. There were other cultures that were very bent on, taking over land, and, there are other cultures that were very heavy on enterprise or technology. And so, as Solomon said, there's not really anything new under the sun. What we really need to be careful to look for is what fruit was produced out of these cultures. And more importantly, and co-equally, how did God view them? What was God's view? How was that nation judged in God's assessment? And so we also have biblical principles that show us what the culture of God's house is to be. And beyond the biblical principles that provide a foundation for those things, we have a very substantial amount of new revelation, at least for our generation, on how that needs to be practiced and put into place. We're not well versed in it. We don't know the boundaries of it quite yet, but we know some basic principles. So what we have said is we're going to do that, and we've done that in the context of those subject matters initially, and Bible study, and some other supplemental materials as well, but all with the goal of what we believe a true education is something that develops the heart and the mind in a cultural basis for how to relate to others, how to understand the world and the times that we live in, and how to honor the will of God in the house of God. So essentially, how do we build God's house? That's the culture of God's house. How to build, nurture, and care for the various parts, portions, responsibilities, assignments, and people in the house of the Lord. Why so? I mean, I don't want to get into a Bible teaching for sure, but one of the things that we, in our foundational teaching, spent a good number of weeks on was looking at the importance of building God's house, why that's so near and dear to his heart, as it connects to the fulfillment of his will and purpose. So it's extremely important that we understand, first of all, the fundamental vision that we are casting for this endeavor. And that, the reason we share it so straightforward is because if any of you are not in line with that vision and its potential, as if that's something that does not settle well, you don't agree with, and we're not casting judgment on you, but we can very confidently say, this is probably not the right engagement for your family and your children. Because that is absolutely our number one priority, and it is a very unwavering, unshakable directive, because it's not our own. It's from the Lord. I can personally testify to the fruit that is being fleshed out or born out in my children. That's about as far as I can go, apart from your own observation of their life. But my observation is pretty near and intimate. So there are also some different aspects of this engagement. So before I move on, let's just settle that what this place is, I know we refer to it many times as an educational center. That's a part of it. But really what it is a place where our young people can learn the culture of God's house. And when we're bringing other academic endeavors into that and under that roof and standing upon that foundation, then you can be assured that what we teach them will be standing on that rock, nothing else. So we're going to be very careful about how we educate, from what perspective we educate, the curriculums we choose, not because we have any desire to tell any parent what they should or should not choose by way of a curriculum. I think that what's more important here is not the curriculum that's chosen, it's how we come to choose it. Did you choose it on your own? Or did we have a corporate conversation about that? Were the leadership involved? Is there a settlement in the heart that this is a good direction for not only your family and your children, but for our community as a whole? Not as if we have very individual community goals, because I hope that you are seeing this as a pretty broad foundational principle in the house of God. And so it's not, there's no desire on my part or Emmanuel's part or Rachel's part in particular, because she'll be the first point of contact with the families about how to proceed in those things through mutual conversation with you. So I hope that you guys can at least, and I don't think you guys are resisting anything, but respect the fact that we're not trying to take control of your children's education. What we want to do is create a learning center where the certain foundations can be laid and built upon, whatever academic skill it is, but fundamentally that we're laying a strong foundation for how the culture of God's house works. Because what we want our children to do is not be certain occupation. Okay, what we want our children to do, no matter how the Lord leads them through their life or into adulthood, that what they are primarily are builders of God's culture. So we're giving them a place both to learn and to practice, so that that becomes second nature to them in everything they do. Then as parents, we can release a lot of the apprehension and tension that comes from our children coming of age. What will they do? Where will they go? What will they choose? Who will they be? How will they act? What will my grandchildren be? So much of that burden we will have a lot of confidence in, because we will have invested in such a way in their lives through the very developmental times of through their lives. It's also fairly obvious that the age parameters that we're engaging with our children. So it's not that we don't expect some level of engagement along this line with the younger ones, but we're leaving that to be worked out mostly in the households and between households, but hopefully with the guidance of the corporate understanding of that, and also the engagement of the leadership. God has given us, I think, some very valuable insight into those things. And again, that's not because we want to come in and say, here's what you have to do, but we want to co-labor with you in that process. The set of time that we are engaging with the children is a very volatile part of life. It's adolescence. There's a lot of changes going on in the children's lives, physically, emotionally, spiritually, and otherwise. And that's just, you can't change that. And I think it's not this sour thing. It's something that God has very uniquely given to the people of God in the shaping of a life. And so rather than being parents who know that that's a time of struggle for their children, know that it's a big time of transition, and then just say, well, this is just the way they are, this is just what it is. What we want to do is, through the enablement that we have at the Cultural Training Center, is really help guide through that process, parent and child. And that is meant to be, again, a co-laboring. It's meant to be mutual. And so if there are things that are a hesitancy or maybe a confusion or misunderstanding on anyone's part about what we're actually doing, then we want to have further conversation. But we also want to know that as we enter into this transition with bringing in a whole new group of students potentially, which is, Emmanuel and John and I were talking just Monday, and in 5 years we're going to have another 10 adults. In 10 years we're going to have another almost 20 adults. We're going to be a young adult community. Okay, that's a very sobering fact, and it will not be beneficial for us to be island families who come and get a teaching and then try to apply it on our own at home. It's not going to work. That won't work for our young people. If that's how they think, if that's how they're taught that things work, then the future of God's work in this community will become very scattered. And we're not trying to force our children to do anything. What we want to learn is how to operate and cooperate as a community. Because that is what is, we believe, really going to be example, first in the heavenly realms, and then to the world.
To end that, just reflecting, we get educated, we go through different aspects of our journey, we learn things, to do things. Look back, really, the skills, the knowledge you learn really doesn't matter too much. And at the end of the day, it's a vision of life, value of life, how to do relationship, how to build a character, hear wisdom, apply wisdom. Those are important things. I think those things can be, oftentimes parents do that huge load of burden can be, but it can be imparted very easily when a community of people really, this is the way how to do things, this is the way life's supposed to be built, you know. So in laws, you don't have to take on the weight of the burden has said, hey, let me convince you this is the way to do this, so, because everybody doing it, you know, so anyway, so
Yeah.
mutually influence one another, so.
And also, I know on Rachel's part, and for us even as leadership, we have not done, I mean, Rachel more than me, or Emmanuel or John, a lot of extensive research on, curriculums and various things. So we're all open to say, let's evaluate this. Let's figure out how this may work best for this group of children or this subject matter or whatever else. We really want to develop those things. But what we really want initially is a corporate agreement and taking hold of the vision that we have for the
More like
culture
a
building
culture
system.
center, you can say, other than fellowship, like here's young people education center,
Mm-hmm.
but it's a culture center, you know. So you're mindful, that's almost like a culture, there is a certain culture, not as a school, as in the institution, a co-op. Here is a local community, people learn culture together, you know, do education together. Go ahead.
Something else that I want to mention, and this can be followed up with potentially some individual conversation with with the parents of each household with Brother Emmanuel, is that we're going to be quite measured in relation to the students that participate in the classes that Emmanuel teaches in particular, because he has a very specific teaching style, and that needs to be something that is palatable to the parent, and specifically to the parent. I think our young people are very malleable and teachable, and willing. I don't see any unwillingness in our children, but I think we all know, just because the majority of us also have had siblings growing up and siblings with children, that when there are specifically disciplinary interactions from any other person in the world with our children, we can receive those very difficultly. Those are very hard to handle. And so there is a portion of that, and anyone who takes a teaching role in the culture center, no matter what subject it is, we need to afford an entrustment to those people. Emmanuel, in particular, in the subject matters that he chooses to engage with the children with, he enjoys those things, the subject matters. Justin's very similar to this with history, but those are very enjoyable things that they have invested a lot of their life in, so they're very passionate about them. But having said that, they're only a tool. The tool is, this is the means by which I'm able to have an interface with this young person. It enables me to get a view into their life. And also, I know from Emmanuel's standpoint, Emmanuel is looking at, how does that child receive me as someone investing in their life, as someone who has something valuable to offer. And the valuable thing that I have to offer is not my knowledge on a subject, it's my way of engaging with you and leading you in how you engage with others and consider purpose. See, the academic side of that, or the subject matter side, is secondary to everything. Most of what my children have learned exponentially has been cultural engagement, relational engagement, honor, respect. Not because they didn't have it, but because they didn't know how to apply it. They didn't know how to function in it. They don't know how it played out in certain relationships and roles. And as much as we may think that our children know those things, when they're put in an environment that's unfamiliar, which becomes familiar to a certain extent after time, obviously, but in the right order, then it changes pretty dramatically every other aspect of their life. And if there's one thing that Christianity has not really been able to do well, it's learn that way of relationship. that way of honor, that way of engagement with others. This is where we would call that the culture of God's house. How do people who are in God's house relate to one another? How do they honor one another, given the grace that God has put on one or another to benefit the body mutually? And they're learning those things. Maybe not through those words, but
just enhance and point
Yep.
on the point I've observed young ones. Young ones, we would think they have a hard time with it. They do, they get rid of certain surface things. But inside of them, man, they're longing for this stuff.
mm-hmm.
It's like, you just set them on fire for things, really, because our children want to love God, wanted to follow example of elder parents. They really want to have a godly life. There's something going on. You need to get that out of them, inspire them. It's almost like there's a passion in each one, powered by certain personality, certain, I would call it individual environment, expectations. When they begin to put in the right place, to recognize they can't be themselves, be the one God called them to be, inspired to be, and they don't need to be shy about it. They have actually the environment, each one celebrate that, each one really encourage one another. That's just like something just come out of them so beautiful, so
Mm-hmm.
yeah. They almost like they can't stop laughing over those things, because making them joyful, making them free. So
Mm-hmm.
and that stage you really don't have to struggle with them, because you just need to come along and say, you're doing all right. Let's move on with what God put in your heart or life before you to move ahead. Good, sorry. Just wanted to
That's
share
really
that
it for
with
me.
you.
One other just practical
Mhm.
aspect of what we're doing in part of the mindset that we're wanting to lay a foundation for in our children. We can discuss potentially how this works with the younger and older ones, but we're requiring that the young people participate in the financial aspect. So what we initially settled was that we're going to collect $50 per student monthly that's engaged, and that's honestly doesn't cover anything. It barely covers the light bill at the studio, but we're not worried about finances. What we are concerned with is the mindset that our children carry in the engagement they have. And so I'm just as an example, I'm supplementing some of that for my young people. Obviously my children all work and earn a little bit of money, and so I think it's very wise to have your children practice two fundamental things financially, at least: tithe first, savings another. That means they need to program two aspects of everything that they earn to be ahead of anything that they keep. It's a very helpful mindset. And so tithe first, savings, and I have equated in some ways the payment that they make to the educational center to tithe, really, because it's something to honor what we're doing. It's not a practical amount of money because it actually doesn't even cover expenses. And so what I'm doing with them is I have told them that they will pay, out of the 50, they will pay 40, and then I'll pay the remainder, so long as they're able to do that. So then they have a personal investment in the things that they're doing. And when I sat down to explain that with each one of my children, it was really about honoring Elaine, Noah, Justin, and Emmanuel for the time and investment that they're taking, and to at least as a token of recognition that someone else is taking something of value to them and imparting it to me. And again, that's not their knowledge. It's their life and their time that's valuable. The things that they have by way of knowledge are also, they're like a bonus. But the real value is the relationship that they get to build with Emmanuel, that they get to build with Justin, or one of the reasons that we want to have further discussion about how we all engage in the educational center is because we want to give our young people, as we've done with the art times and otherwise, the opportunity to directly engage with the leadership in our community, the heads of household, those who are the heads of the families, so that we can share mutually the vision of life that we carry with one another. That is just part of the things that we're putting in place in relation to the functionality, practically speaking, of the education center. So I would say, if you are able as a parent to offer a little more, we're not requiring that, we're not begging for it, nothing, but that is something that would be beneficial to the community. So right now Emmanuel is distributing those funds. He's receiving them first. So in terms of the next few weeks or the month or so, if there are new young people getting engaged, right now kind of the process there is to send those monies directly to Emmanuel via Venmo, and then he distributes them as necessary to the needs of the educational center and those involved. So I've had my children directly send to him. I want them to be hands-on responsible for that.
Build a personal responsibility in finances.
Right.
And their own finances with young is more important than money transaction itself. Just still
Right.
here when you're dealing with. I think that's part of the lack of family education or Christian education. It's really not realistic and practical. So those things are almost awkward or sensitive. That should be the number one transparent topic we talk about. We're obsessed with it, or only this matter. Things will never free from those concerns. What you do is openly discuss with them, especially set up an occasion, say, hey, let me tell you how to handle these things. Or you should have an open mind, transparent heart, a healthy attitude to all these things. And we know the world don't do that. The second thing, I think, is this thing is almost like trying to eradicate the false church culture that imparted education, everything is free, right? I'm not sure the word free. It's like nobody's, it's all taken care of by things. I don't need to contribute to be part of the constructor for it. I don't need to help along, because you go to church, everything's free for you, That's wrong mindsets. I understand that is a Christianity habit, but imagine other nations. They will build a church, they're going to do something, everybody's supposed to help, right? So to be part of the help. And that is important too for young people. In the very beginning, you said, here, the things you do is don't take for granted. You're part of the consultator, you're the part of the helper. You're important, your contribution matters. They need to learn, not more than not take for granted, but learn to contribute more, build God's cause in real practical manners, and with a thankful heart and you gotta get him what I want to try to say. So, yeah, Tim, you go ahead. I'm sorry about this.
No, that's really it for me. Just
Okay.
wanted to kind of, as Rachel was requesting, kind of recast the vision for what we're doing, garner your agreement and support, so that we're doing something together. We're not trying to do something separate from you guys or your own educational efforts up to this point. In fact, we still very much hope and believe that each one of you parents have a lot of value to bring to this process. We can't do it without you, really.
Yeah. Don't be stressed out about it. It's part of the grow up,
Yeah.
You have new things. It will be a transitional juggling around the kids to work with everybody, that in the process to working it out. So have open dialogue about those things.
Mm-hmm.
Rachel, do you have some practical thing you want to talk about more?
No, I don't think so. That's what I was just saying. I would
You
like
just wanna
to
start a
individually
conversation?
sit down with
Okay.
everybody, just
Okay.
to
Sure.
go deeper, and I, try the best I can answer any questions. I may or may not have all the
Sure.
answers, but,
Sure.
no, that was just the only two kind of practical things with the specifics on Monday and Saturday at this
Yeah.
time of what we're looking at, so.
Well, me and Kim Morse, we help, but the real discussion gonna be between you guys, the chosen education subject matter, what to do, those details. Rachel will lead the point. I did share with Rachel, I think Rachel oftentimes too humble to fight. I did tell her a little bit on the front to share with the parents the importance of when you do something, set up something, to bring some kind of a healthy communication. For example, someone when you teach a course, leading an activity, regularly give update what's going on, there's problems going on, don't just solve it only than personal aspects or that territory, rather give a report, dialogue, what's going on. I think that was celebrated and enjoyed. Yes, those are part of working in a greater context relationship, because if we do it as on a personal level, or this one class level, imagine the children observe how you interact with problems. They will see it's no different than on the school, than yourself doing things. They will not see another subject, actually you are responsible and involved with a greater community, right? They will not take that on. But that is actually more important than any matters in the course we set things up. Is for children have awareness that everything we do is a community supported, a greater family, that's the context it carry. So I hope you understand my point. The point is that actually sometimes trouble spring from those who work together through it is actually is a greater blessing in guys. I mean, rather than small city everything going on, end of the day said, oh, we just have good class, we have good teacher, have never been touched by community. That's awareness, if I'm making sense to you. So I think, on you guys' part, take a special effort to do that, because you may done it in the past, your children is young, or life does not afford you to do that. So take a special effort to do that. So introduce that aspect for children to be part of the community. And yourself, you understand, look at you, you're part of your community. It's not a control, it's really cultural building, those awareness is so important. Okay, so for example, let's see, Andy leaving on vacation and Benji and the home still around to have something going on. Maybe troublesome and you guys are rich. Okay? Is who you gonna call? Who gonna do the concert?
I live 5 minutes.
Oh great, okay, so you see my point, so yeah. So those are obviously something, you need to build up, right? Parents has to be a leading example, almost to say, okay, this is how we channel our relationships, so and for Rachel and me and Tim, we don't want to impose on anybody, this is all volunteer based, so we just say, hey, this is the thing God wants us to build up. And they're not small, because eventually they will dramatically change the generation that we are in and lay the foundation, a new culture from the generation that are before us, whatever. So those are not small stuff. Those are not small stuff. Let's look at, I wouldn't be looking at negative part, this is a personal struggle. Do I have a group of people really giving God a counsel rather than just to share my emotions on my level? Family do that, friends do that, in the world. But our community should be a God culture, God counsel oriented help. Am I right? Says my point. Not just everybody link your own wounds, so what is it called? Linking each other's wounds. That's not gonna help in the end of the day, so but no, we need to continue to be healed, to be healthy, and to be each one. We eventually be culture builders. We want the children particularly trained up without being culture builders. You know, they will not repeat our mistakes. They will be used down to impart cultures in our relationship concern. So that's a bigger context why we do. But it started with small things. Now we look at it, oh, this is something. Actually, think about how your life grew up, like certain things, what happened to you? You give to the academic world, give to certain culture, certain environment. Right now we just said, oh my God, I just, stumble all the time, so I don't know what to do, so, and you look at back, really, it's because those things are not provisioned in the beginning. You have to learn, reproven, so that's my point, so.
Well, thank you guys. I really appreciate everybody continuing on our meetings for the last bit, and I'm really glad Tim and Emmanuel were able to join us and add in what I could not quite so eloquently say. So I know everybody's got a day ahead of them, and don't want to keep everybody much longer, but if somebody wanted to end in prayer and then
I would like to hear questions, so.
nope, not today.
Oh,
We don't have time today. I'm so sorry. That's how I started the meeting.
I'm a joking.
I want questions, I want to hear feedback, but we do have a lot to cover, so I think, I'd love to meet all together again, for sure.
Yeah.
I'm not saying we can't do that, but,
Okay, go ahead, it's just
Yeah.
one interrupt you.
no, that was all I had to say. I just knew that we had a short meeting today, and then, like I said, I'm gonna reach out to everybody to meet individually, here in the next couple
Okay.
weeks, so.
Okay, hallelujah, we're going to stand up for the Lord. This is very good stuff.
Amen.
Benny, sorry, we're not Grace with hands.
Yeah.
She has paws.
Go ahead, guys.
I just need to say that the Lord is so blessed by this. I can feel that in His presence, just the willingness to foundationally serve Him in every single area, especially this area, is so honoring to Him. I just felt like I needed to share that.
And bless it. Thank you.
There's one more thing. I'm just hearing the word submitted, that I think we need to be submitted to this. We've been talking, I think, a lot about authority, that the Lord is placing on the governing authority that God's establishing in this community, and so I just heard that word as well.
Father, we bless your work in our midst. We bless it. We submit to it, Lord. I thank you for the hearts and minds of these adults. Lord, for the unity that you have grown and built and nurtured and revealed to us step by step. I thank you for the gentle sweetness of your heart, your love. Just as we desire to guide and shepherd our little ones that you have entrusted to us, so you guide and shepherd us as a good father. And I just see your hand of gentleness and love in this process. I'm just so grateful for it, Lord. I pray, Lord, that you would bless us now with the grace to participate in fullness in whichever way each unique person has been created to offer. Lord, I ask not only practically and situationally that you would open doors and make a way, Lord, but that spiritually and mentally we would be enabled by your grace, Lord, to recognize the treasures that you have given in each heart and mind and each personal experience, Lord, to be able to turn around then and offer to the next generation, because each person here has so much value and contribution. It doesn't all look the same. It's on purpose, it's different, Lord. On purpose, it's multifaceted. On purpose, it's differentiated, each one in a different area that may not even be formally instructed in any way, Lord, but not any less valuable. And I just ask, Lord, that you would give us eyes to see in each one what it is, Lord, that you have given us to offer. And I just cut off any hesitation on anyone's part, any lies that anyone believes, Lord, that they might not have something to offer, because it is impossible. It is impossible in the design of your body that any person here is not called to pour forth and serve with what you have given. So I just thank you for that, Lord, and I trust you, Lord, in how you will make a way for that to come to fruition. I just bless your heart in it. I bless the vision of it. I ask that those who are now actively engaged, Lord, would be enabled by you as pioneers, Lord, to be willing to stumble a little as things grow into what you want it to be. Lord, I just pray for all of us to have that willingness in the growing process, Lord, to trust you. It's ultimately you that we trust, Lord. And I just thank you for all of these young lives, Lord, as we even just joke of how empty the room seems without them. But what a precious I know your heart also overflows with joy when you consider them. That you have entrusted so many to us. Thank you, Lord. I pray that we would be stewards who are yielded and worthy of such an opportunity. And I pray that we would be continually rid of the beliefs that we have enough within our own households to give them what they need in you, Lord. I thank you for the victories that you've already won and that you will continue to win in this area. Lord, and I just bless what you're doing. I pray that you would continue, Lord, to protect it. I ask for protection in our relationships, Lord. I ask for guards over our minds. Lord, that we would never be tempted, Lord, to lose the vision. That you would continually bring us back, Lord, to our true north. Lord, as our true north, that you would continue to remind us the target, Lord, and the intentions of each person. And I just pray that our relationships, Lord, not only would be guarded, Lord, but strengthened in this process. Help us to be willing, Lord, to wrestle through with one another as we all share the same heart and goal. Help us to truly love one another with your love, Lord. And let it be the testimony. How can 6 families, 5 families, however many, Lord, how can families love in this way? It is otherworldly. It is out of this world, divine type of love. To be able to walk together hand in hand, arm in arm, step for step, tuned to your pitch and frequency and marching to the beat of your heart.
Hallelujah.
That we would be enabled to raise this generation in such a way. It is only by your grace and only by your power that such a thing is possible.